My name is Bessie Williams, 62 years old, and I've been a widow for 3 years now. My husband Richard dedicated 20 years of his life to restoring his 1967 Shelby GT 500 Mustang. It was his pride and joy, almost like another child to us. But last Monday, I walked into our garage and found nothing but an empty space where that beautiful car should have been. What my son told me that day shattered my heart. Then a phone call changed everything. If you're joining my story today, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. Richard Walters wasn't just my husband of 40 years. He was a man who found his purpose in bringing beautiful things back to life. Nothing demonstrated that more than his beloved Mustang. I can still remember the day he brought that car home in 1998. I wouldn't even call it a car back then. It was more like a rusted shell with 4 flat tires that had to be towed into our driveway. "Bessie, honey," he said with that boyish grin that made me fall in love with him all over again, "this is going to be the most beautiful Shelby GT500 you've ever seen." I looked at that heap of metal and honestly thought he had lost his mind. The neighbors weren't thrilled either. Mrs. Patterson from across the street came over the very next day with a petition about eyesores and property values. Richard just smiled, offered her lemonade, and promised it wouldn't be outside for long. He cleared out half our garage that weekend, making a permanent home for what he called his diamond in the rough. Living with a car enthusiast isn't always easy. Our house became a shrine to automotive restoration. The coffee table was always covered with classic car magazines. The spare bedroom transformed into what Richard called his planning office, but was really just walls of shelves filled with car parts catalogs and restoration manuals. Every Christmas and birthday, I knew exactly what to get him gift cards to auto parts stores or vintage car memorabilia. He was predictable that way, and I loved him for it. The restoration became our weekend ritual. While other couples went to movies or fancy dinners, Richard and I spent our Saturdays in the garage. I wasn't mechanically inclined, but I became his assistant. I'd hand him tools, help hold parts in place, or just sit on an old stool, reading aloud from restoration guides while he worked. Sometimes our son Jake would join us when he was younger. Richard tried so hard to pass his passion down to Jake, patiently explaining every component and process. "A car isn't just transportation," Richard would tell Jake. "It's history you can touch. It's engineering you can feel. Someday this Mustang will tell our family story too." The Mustang wasn't just a car to Richard. It became part of our family's milestones. When Jake graduated high school, Richard took him for a ride in the partially restored Mustang, even though only half the body was painted and the interior was still bare metal. When Jake brought home his first serious girlfriend, Richard proudly showed her the progress on the car. When Jake got married, we took wedding photos with the almost completed Mustang in the background. Richard had a particular way of working on that car. He maintained what he called his car Bible, a thick leather-bound notebook where he documented every single thing he did to the Mustang. Part diary, part technical manual, that notebook contained measurements, part numbers, receipts, and his personal thoughts about the restoration process. He would often write late into the night, sketching designs or making lists of parts he needed. "I'm building this car twice," he used to say, "once on paper and once in metal." Everything changed when Richard was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 8 months, maybe a year with treatment. I wanted him to rest, to spend his remaining time taking trips or visiting friends, but Richard had other plans. "I'm going to finish her," he told me the day after his diagnosis. "That car is getting done before I go." The Mustang became his therapy. On days when the chemo made him too weak to lift a wrench, he'd sit in the driver's seat running his hands over the dashboard he'd painstakingly restored. Sometimes I'd find him there at dawn, having spent the night in the garage when sleep wouldn't come. The car gave him purpose when the cancer tried to take everything away. Friends from his car club started showing up on weekends to help. They'd bring parts, tools, and food, turning our garage into a workshop and our kitchen into a cafeteria. Jake came by more often, too, during those months, finally connecting with his father over the car in a way Richard had always hoped for. 3 weeks before Richard passed away, the restoration was complete. That Sunday morning, I helped him dress in his favorite flannel shirt and jeans. He was so thin by then, his wedding ring loose on his finger. 4 of his buddies came over to help him into the Mustang's driver's seat. The engine roared to life on the first try, a sound so beautiful it brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Listen to that Bessie," Richard said over the rumble of the engine. "That's the sound of love time and hard work." We took a short drive around the neighborhood, Richard at the wheel, despite his weakness. Mrs. Patterson, who had complained about the eyesore years earlier, came out to applaud as we drove by. Richard insisted we take a photo of everyone who had helped with the car that day. That picture sat on his bedside table until the end. The night before he passed away, Richard held my hand and made me promise something. "Keep her safe, Bessie," he whispered. "That Shelby's got our whole life inside her. When the time is right, she'll tell our story to Jake in a way I never could." I didn't fully understand what he meant then. I thought it was just the medication talking. But I promised anyway because you don't deny a dying man's request, especially when that man is the love of your life. After the funeral, I kept my promise. I learned how to maintain the car properly. Richard's car club friends helped showing me basic maintenance and finding a mechanic who specialized in classics for the more complicated work. Every Sunday morning, rain or shine, I would take the Mustang for a drive along Richard's favorite coastal route. It became my own ritual, my way of keeping him close. In the quiet rumble of that engine, I could almost hear him talking to me, telling me everything would be okay. I never imagined that car would lead to the greatest betrayal of my life, and I certainly never thought it would eventually bring healing in a way Richard somehow knew we would need. After Richard passed away, my relationship with Jake changed in ways I never expected. My son had always been close to us growing up. He was a thoughtful child who inherited his father's patience and my practicality. Jake followed his father into engineering, though he chose computer software instead of mechanical work. Richard was bursting with pride when Jake started his own software consulting business 10 years ago. Jake met Tiffany at a tech conference in San Francisco 7 years ago. She was working in social media marketing for a startup with a talent for making everything look perfect online. She was beautiful, ambitious, and 15 years younger than Jake. When they got married a year later, Richard and I were cautiously optimistic. We noticed how different she was from the down-to-earth girls Jake had dated before, but we wanted him to be happy. "Give her time," Richard told me after a particularly tense Thanksgiving dinner where Tiffany spent more time photographing the food than eating it. "She'll either grow into the family or Jake will figure things out himself." But after the wedding, Jake started visiting less frequently. Our Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly events. When Richard got sick, Jake was supportive, but always seemed in a rush, checking his phone constantly while visiting his father. Tiffany rarely came along, always with some excuse about work or prior commitments. After Richard's death, I tried to maintain my connection with Jake. I'd invite them over, offer to help with anything they needed, send care packages of Jake's favorite homemade cookies. But the distance between us kept growing. Jake's business was doing well from what I could tell, though he never talked about it in detail anymore. Their social media showed an enviable lifestyle: expensive restaurants, designer clothes, lavish parties. Tiffany had become something of an influencer with thousands of followers admiring her perfect home and glamorous life. I first noticed something might be wrong about 8 months ago. Jake canceled our dinner plans last minute, something he rarely did even with our strained relationship. When I dropped by his office the next day with lunch thinking he might be overworked, his assistant seemed surprised. "Jake hasn't been in much lately," she said. "The Johnson account fell through and we lost the Meridian contract last month." When Jake finally called me back, he was defensive, insisting everything was fine and the business was just restructuring. I didn't press him, but I started noticing worrying signs. The lease on his downtown office wasn't renewed. His longtime assistant posted about finding a new job. Jake sold the boat he'd bought just 2 years earlier. At the same time, Tiffany's social media activity increased. There were more designer outfits, more exclusive restaurants, more perfect vacation photos. It seemed the worse things got, the more they pretended everything was wonderful. I recognized the pattern from friends whose marriages had fallen apart under financial strain. They were trying to keep up appearances while their foundation was crumbling. I'll never forget the last Sunday dinner we had together just a week before the incident with the car. Jake and Tiffany arrived an hour late. Jake looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his jaw I recognized from Richard whenever he was stressed. Tiffany was impeccably dressed as always, but I noticed her handbag was new with a designer logo I'd seen in magazines. During dinner, Tiffany dominated the conversation with talk about her social media brand and her growing influence. Jake stayed quiet, drinking more wine than I'd ever seen him consume. When Tiffany mentioned their upcoming wedding anniversary, her eyes lit up. "We're planning something special this year," she said, cutting off my offer to make them dinner. "I've always dreamed of Paris in the spring. The Eiffel Tower champagne at sunset shopping on the Champs-Élysées. Jake nearly choked on his wine. We haven't actually decided on Paris yet, honey, he said quickly. But you promised, Tiffany replied, her smile tight. Everyone expects it. I've already hinted about it to my followers. I saw the flash of panic in Jake's eyes before he masked it. That's when I knew for certain they were in financial trouble. After dessert, when Tiffany excused herself to take a phone call, I gently brought it up. Jake, is everything okay with the business with money? You know I can help if you need it. His reaction surprised me. Instead of relief or gratitude, his face hardened. We're fine, Mom. I don't need my mother bailing me out. I can take care of my wife and myself. The pride in his voice reminded me so much of Richard that I didn't push further. Richard had been the same way, reluctant to ask for help, determined to solve his own problems. But Richard had never let pride push him into bad decisions the way I feared Jake might. As they left that night, I hugged Jake a little tighter than usual. Your father would be so proud of the man you've become, I told him. But he'd also tell you that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is ask for help. Jake's eyes watered slightly, and for a moment I thought I'd gotten through to him. Then Tiffany called from the car, impatient to leave, and the moment was gone. I never imagined that the next time I saw my son, he would have betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. If I had known what was coming, would I have said something different, done something more? These questions haunted me in the dark days that followed. The morning I discovered the Mustang was gone started like any other Sunday. I woke up at 6:30, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with Richard's car Bible. This had become my Sunday ritual before taking the Mustang for its weekly drive. I would review Richard's notes, remembering his voice as I read his careful instructions about proper engine warm-up and the quirks of the transmission. That morning was unusually warm for March perfect convertible weather. Richard would have called it a top-down kind of day. I finished my coffee, grabbed the Mustang's keys from the hook by the door, and headed to the garage with a lightness in my step I hadn't felt in weeks. The first thing I noticed was the side door to the garage was slightly ajar. I frowned, certain I had locked it the previous weekend after my drive. I had always been meticulous about security, especially when it came to the Mustang. As I pushed the door open wider, the silence struck me. Usually just entering the garage would trigger the motion sensor lights Richard had installed, accompanied by the subtle click of the security system acknowledging my entry. But there was nothing, just silence and the dim morning light filtering through the dusty windows. When I flipped the light switch manually, the fluorescent tubes buzzed to life, illuminating an empty space where the Shelby should have been. The outline of the car was still visible in the dust on the concrete floor like a crime scene chalk drawing marking where a body had fallen. Richard's tools hung neatly on their pegboard. The workbench stood organized just as he had left it. But the car, the heart of this space, was gone. My first thought was robbery. I ran back to the house, hands shaking so badly I dropped the phone twice before managing to call the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I called my neighbor Tom, who had security cameras facing the street. I can check the footage, he offered immediately. What time frame are we looking at? I realized I didn't know. I'd last seen the car 6 days ago, after my Sunday drive. The thought that someone could have taken it days ago, and I wouldn't have known, made me sick to my stomach. While Tom reviewed his security footage, I called Jake. His phone went straight to voicemail twice before he answered on my third attempt, his voice groggy with sleep. Mom, it's not even 8 o'clock. What's wrong? The Mustang is gone, I said, my voice breaking. Someone took it from the garage. There was a pause that lasted too long. Jake, did you hear me? Your father's car is gone. I know, he finally said, his voice suddenly clear of any sleep. I took it. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I gripped the kitchen counter to steady myself. What do you mean you took it? Why would you take the car without telling me? I didn't take it exactly, Jake said, his voice taking on a defensive edge I recognized from his teenage years. I sold it. The police cruiser pulled into my driveway just as Jake's words registered. Through the kitchen window, I waved them off, pointing to the phone and mouthing false alarm. The officer nodded and returned to his vehicle, likely thinking it was just another confused older woman making a mistake. You sold it. My voice didn't sound like my own. You sold your father's car. How could you even do that? You don't have the title. You don't have the right. I need to come over, Jake said instead of answering. Tiffany and I will be there in 30 minutes. Don't do anything until we get there. He hung up before I could respond. Tom called next, confusion in his voice. Bessie, I checked the footage from Tuesday night. I saw Jake loading the Mustang onto a flatbed trailer around 11 p.m. I assumed you knew about it. The betrayal cut even deeper. Jake had come in the night like a thief to take what wasn't his. I thanked Tom and hung up, then sat at the kitchen table staring at Richard's car Bible trying to make sense of what was happening. True to his word, Jake's BMW pulled into the driveway exactly 30 minutes later. Tiffany was with him, dressed immaculately as always in designer sunglasses and a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. They entered without knocking, Jake's old key still working in the lock he'd grown up with. "Mom," Jake began as they walked into the kitchen. "I can explain." I noticed Tiffany was filming with her phone, panning around my kitchen as if documenting a momentous occasion. When she saw me looking, she quickly lowered the device but didn't turn it off. "What are you doing?" I asked her. "Just capturing the moment," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Family memories." "Put the phone away," Jake told her, surprising me with his sharp tone. Tiffany's smile faltered, but she complied, setting the phone on the counter with the camera still facing us. "You sold your father's car," I said, focusing on Jake. It wasn't a question anymore. "Why?" Jake sat across from me, running his hands through his hair in a gesture so like his father it made my chest ache. "The business is in trouble, Mom. We've lost major clients. The market changed. Our savings are gone." "You could have come to me," I said, reaching for his hand. I offered to help. He pulled away. "I don't need charity. I found my own solution. By stealing your father's car." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "That car wasn't yours to sell, Jake." "It's just a car," Tiffany interjected, examining her manicure. "An old, noisy car that was sitting in a garage most of the time." I turned to her, anger finally breaking through my shock. "That car was 20 years of your father-in-law's life. It was his legacy." "A legacy," Jake laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "A legacy is something that helps the next generation. That car was just sitting there depreciating." "It wasn't depreciating," I corrected him, thinking of the offers Richard had received in the months before his death. "It's worth more every year. Your father knew that." "Exactly," Jake said, leaning forward. "And now that value is doing something useful instead of collecting dust." Tiffany pulled out her phone again, this time opening a photo gallery. She slid it across the table to me. "Look what we were able to do with that value." The screen showed confirmation for first-class plane tickets to Paris, a reservation for a suite at a hotel I recognized from luxury travel magazines, and a long itinerary of Michelin-starred restaurants and exclusive boutiques. "Our anniversary trip," she said proudly. "Jake promised me Paris this year. This is how influencers at my level travel." I looked up from the phone to my son's face, searching for some sign of the boy Richard and I'd raised. "You sold your father's pride and joy for a vacation." "For our marriage," Jake corrected. "Tiffany deserves the best. Dad would have understood that." "Your father would never have understood this," I said quietly. "He would be heartbroken." "Dad would have wanted us to enjoy life," Jake insisted, his voice rising. "He always said life was for the living, not at the expense of honor. Not by stealing." Jake's face flushed. "I didn't steal anything. That car was my inheritance." "No, it wasn't," I said. "Your father never included the Mustang in his will. He wanted me to decide when the time was right to pass it on to you." "Well, I decided the time was right now," Jake snapped, standing suddenly. "It's done, Mom. I sold it. My wife wanted Paris, and I made it happen. Get over it." Tiffany beamed at him with pride, slipping her arm through his. "We should go, babe. Our flight leaves tomorrow morning, and I still need to pick up some things for the trip." As they headed for the door, I called after them. "Jake, that car wasn't just metal and paint. It was everything your father wanted to share with you." He paused at the door, and for a moment I thought I'd reached him. Then Tiffany tugged his arm, and whatever moment of reflection he might have had vanished. "We'll bring you back a souvenir from Paris," Tiffany called over her shoulder. "Something to remember this by." After they left, I returned to the garage in a daze. Standing in the empty space where the Mustang should have been, I noticed something else missing. The shelf where Richard kept his car Bible was bare. Jake had taken that too, probably to provide maintenance records to the buyer. It was the final insult, taking not just the car, but the journal of our memories as well. I sank down onto the concrete floor in the outline where the Mustang had stood for so many years and finally let myself cry. The days that followed the discovery were some of the darkest I've experienced since Richard's death. I moved through my house like a ghost, touching his things, remembering how he looked working on that car, the way his face would light up when he solved a particularly difficult restoration problem. Each memory was now tainted by Jake's betrayal. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's face on the day we took that final drive in the completed Mustang. "Keep her safe," he had asked of me. I had failed in the one promise he had asked me to keep. 3 days after Jake and Tiffany left for Paris, I finally pulled myself together enough to take action. My first call was to Richard's old car club. Many of the members had become like extended family over the years, especially after Richard's passing. When I explained what happened, the outrage was immediate. "That boy had no right," said Frank, the club president, who had known Richard for 30 years. "We need to find that car before it disappears forever." Frank organized the club members into a search team. They made calls to every classic car dealership, auction house, and private collector they knew. I provided all the documentation I had, including photos and the VIN number I had fortunately recorded in my own notes. "A '67 Shelby GT500 in that condition will stand out," Frank assured me. "Whoever bought it will want to show it off. We'll find it." While the car club searched, I decided to approach the problem from another angle. If Jake had sold the car illegally, there might be legal recourse to recover it. I found Richard's attorney's card in his desk drawer and called the number. Harold Jennings had handled all of Richard's legal affairs, including his will. He remembered me immediately and was appalled by what I told him. "Mrs. Williams, I can confirm with absolute certainty that the Mustang was not included in your husband's bequest to your son," Harold said after consulting his files. "The vehicle remained titled in your name as the surviving spouse. If your son sold it without your authorization, that constitutes auto theft." "I don't want to send my son to jail," I said, my heart heavy. "I just want Richard's car back." "I understand," Harold said gently, "but you should know your legal standing. Your son had no right to sell that vehicle. The sale would be considered fraudulent, which means you have a strong case for recovering the car from whoever purchased it." He advised me to file a police report, which would be necessary if legal action became required. I thanked him, but couldn't bring myself to formally accuse my son of theft just yet. There had to be another way. That night I sat in Richard's study, surrounded by his car magazines and restoration books. On his desk sat a framed photo of him, standing proudly next to the completed Mustang, his arm around Jake on the day of our son's college graduation. They looked so happy, so connected. Where had that gone? How had money and status become more important to Jake than his father's legacy? I picked up one of Richard's restoration journals, a different one from the car Bible Jake had taken. Inside, I found a business card I'd never seen before for Classic Automotive Gallery, with the name Howard Bennett Owner, embossed in gold lettering. I vaguely remembered Richard mentioning Howard, another car enthusiast he'd met at shows who owned an upscale dealership specializing in rare classics. It was too late to call, but I added Howard's name to the list of dealerships we needed to check. If nothing else, he might have connections in the collector community that could help locate the Mustang. The next morning, I forced myself to eat breakfast and was making a fresh pot of coffee when the phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number. "Mrs. Williams, Bessie Williams," a deep voice asked when I answered. "Yes, this is she," I replied, bracing myself for a telemarketer or scam call. "Mrs. Williams, my name is Howard Bennett. I'm the owner of Classic Automotive Gallery in Birmingham." My heart skipped a beat. The business card I'd found just the night before. "Yes, Mr. Bennett. I actually have your card. My husband, Richard Williams, knew you." "Yes, I remember Richard well. Brilliant restoration work." Howard paused. "Mrs. Williams, I believe I may have something that belongs to you. A 1967 Shelby GT500 Mustang in Highland Green." My legs gave out and I sank into a kitchen chair. "You have Richard's car." "I purchased it 3 days ago from a gentleman who claimed to have inherited it from his father," Howard explained. "But something about the transaction felt off. The seller was too eager, the price negotiation too quick. And the car, well, Cars like that come with stories. The love in that restoration was obvious. Howard went on to explain that after the sale, he had examined the vehicle more carefully and found inconsistencies in the paperwork. The title transfer documentation appeared recently created but backdated. His suspicions aroused he had done some research on the car's history and tracked down connection to Richard through the car club community. When I learned that Richard Williams had passed away 3 years ago and that his widow still drove the car regularly, I knew something wasn't right, Howard said. The seller claimed to be the rightful owner through inheritance, but my sources tell me the car was never part of any inheritance plan. The seller was my son. I admitted shame washing over me. He took the car without permission and sold it to fund a trip to Paris with his wife. Howard was quiet for a moment. I'm very sorry to hear that, Mrs. Williams. Family situations can be complicated. But from a legal standpoint, I need to know, are you the rightful owner of this vehicle? Yes, I said firmly. The car was titled jointly to my husband and me. Upon his death, it transferred to me alone. I never authorized its sale. Then we have a problem that needs resolving, Howard said. I paid your son a considerable sum for a car he had no right to sell. Legally, the car is still yours, but I'm out the purchase amount. My heart sank. I didn't have the kind of money Howard had likely paid for a rare Shelby in pristine condition. I don't know if I can repay you immediately, Mr. Bennett, but the car means everything to me. It's all I have left of my husband's passion. I'm not asking for repayment, Mrs. Williams, Howard said, surprising me. I've been in this business long enough to know these things happen. I can pursue your son legally for the fraudulent sale, but first I think you should come to the gallery. There's something else you need to know about the car. Something else, I echoed, confused. Yes, Howard said. When I was inspecting the vehicle, I found something unusual. A hidden compartment behind the dashboard. There are items inside that I believe Richard left there deliberately, items meant for you and possibly your son. My mind raced. A hidden compartment. Richard had never mentioned such a thing. What could he have possibly hidden in the car? I can be there in an hour, I told Howard. Perfect, he replied. And Mrs. Williams, I believe everything happens for a reason. Perhaps this unfortunate situation with your son is leading to something Richard intended all along. As I hung up the phone, a strange sense of hope replaced the despair I'd been feeling. The car had been found, and somehow Richard was still speaking to us through it. I arrived at Classic Automotive Gallery precisely 1 hour after Howard's call. The dealership was housed in what appeared to be a renovated airplane hangar, its glass front gleaming in the morning sunlight. Inside spotlights illuminated a collection of the most beautiful classic cars I had ever seen, each one positioned on a raised platform like a museum exhibit. A tall man with silver hair and kind eyes approached as I entered, hand extended. Mrs. Williams, Howard Bennett, thank you for coming so quickly. Please call me Bessie, I said, shaking his hand. And thank you for calling me about the car. You didn't have to do that. Howard smiled sadly. Actually, I did. Ethics still matter in this business, at least to me. Besides, I knew Richard from the restoration community. He spoke at one of our classic car symposiums about 5 years ago. His work was legendary. The mention of Richard's reputation made my heart swell with pride. Even now, years after his passing, his passion and craftsmanship were remembered and respected. Is the Mustang here? I asked, looking around the showroom. Howard nodded. Follow me. I've placed it in our private viewing area. He led me through a door marked Private Collection into a smaller room with subdued lighting, and there it was, Richard's Shelby GT500, its Highland green paint gleaming under the spotlights as if it had just rolled off the assembly line in 1967. The sight of it brought tears to my eyes. She's beautiful, Howard said softly, standing beside me. One of the finest restorations I've ever seen. The attention to detail is extraordinary. Richard was truly an artist. I approached the car, slowly running my hand along its familiar curves. This vehicle contained so many memories, so many hours of Richard's life. Having it back felt like recovering a piece of him I'd lost all over again. Jake took good care of it, at least, I said, noticing the waxed finish and clean interior. He used to help his father with maintenance sometimes. Howard walked to the driver's side and opened the door. Would you like to sit inside? There's something I need to show you. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool and smooth beneath me. The familiar scent of the interior, a mixture of leather conditioner and the special polish Richard always used on the dashboard, enveloped me like an embrace. I placed my hands on the steering wheel, feeling the connection to Richard strengthen. Howard knelt by the open door. When I was inspecting the car after purchase, I noticed something unusual about the construction of the center console. There appeared to be a discrepancy between the external dimensions and the internal storage space. He reached over and demonstrated a specific sequence, pressing the cigarette lighter, turning the radio dial to a specific frequency, and then pulling up on the ashtray while pushing in on the dashboard clock. To my amazement, a small section of the dashboard slid back and then up, revealing a hidden compartment about the size of a shoebox built into the console. Inside were 3 items: a weathered leather journal I recognized as one of Richard's notebooks, but not the main car Bible, a small USB drive, and a wooden box about the size of my palm. Richard never mentioned a hidden compartment, I said, stunned. How did you know to look for it? Howard smiled. I didn't, not specifically. But in 40 years of dealing with classic cars, you develop a sense for when something isn't quite standard. Many collectors build secret spaces into their vehicles for important documents or valuable items. Once I felt the discrepancy, finding the mechanism was just a matter of patient exploration. With trembling hands, I removed the items from the compartment. The wooden box had a small brass plaque on top engraved with the words, "For when the time is right." I opened it carefully to find Richard's wedding ring, nestled alongside a vintage pocket watch that had belonged to his father. Attached was a handwritten note in Richard's distinctive handwriting, "For when Jake is ready to truly understand what matters." Tears blurred my vision as I set the box aside and opened the journal. Unlike the methodical technical car Bible, this journal contained personal reflections. I flipped through pages of Richard's thoughts about fatherhood legacy and the values he hoped to pass on to Jake. The entries spanned years, beginning when Jake was in college and continuing until just weeks before Richard's death. One entry from near the end caught my eye. "The car is nearly complete, and so I fear is my time. I've come to understand that Jake may never share my passion for restoration. That's all right. But the lessons of patience, craftsmanship, and finding beauty in broken things, those are what I truly want him to inherit. Not just a vehicle, but a vision for living. If he sells the car someday for its monetary value alone, then I will have failed to convey what matters most. But perhaps through these words and memories I'm hiding within the very object he might be tempted to reduce to a price tag he'll find his way back to understanding." Howard respectfully stepped away, giving me privacy as I wiped away tears. "There's more," he said gently, pointing to the USB drive. "Would you like to see what's on it?" I nodded, unable to speak. Howard led me to his office where he inserted the USB drive into a computer. It contained video files, dozens of them, each labeled with a date. He clicked on the first one. Richard's face filled the screen, healthier than in his final days, but still showing signs of his illness. He sat in the Mustang's driver's seat, engine off the garage, visible behind him. "Hello, Jake," Richard began, his voice strong and clear. "If you're watching this, then you found my little time capsule. I'm recording these messages for you because there are things I want to make sure you know, things I might not be around to tell you in person." I watched transfixed as Richard spoke directly to our son about life values and what truly constitutes a legacy. He talked about his own father and the lessons he had learned. He reflected on mistakes he had made in his life and wisdom he had gained. And he talked about Jake, expressing pride in the man he had become, but concern about the values he seemed to be adopting. "The world will tell you that success is measured in dollars, son. That's the easy metric. But a life well lived is measured by integrity, by the strength of your relationships, by the positive mark you leave on others' lives. This car isn't valuable because of what it might sell for at auction. It's valuable because of the journey, the patience it taught me, the community it connected us to, and the time you and I spent together working on it." Howard stopped the video, his own eyes damp. "There are dozens more messages here. It seems Richard was creating a legacy beyond just the vehicle itself, a time-release inheritance of wisdom." I sat back in the chair, overwhelmed. "He knew," I whispered. Somehow Richard knew Jake might be tempted to sell the car someday. He built this secret into it as a way to reach him even after he was gone. Howard nodded. "Richard was clearly a man of foresight. The question now is, What do you want to do about the car? And about your son? I thought about Jake and Tiffany in Paris spending money from the sale of a legacy they didn't understand. I thought about the legal options Harold Jennings had outlined. And I thought about what Richard would want in this situation. I don't want to press charges against my son, I said finally. That would only drive him further away. But I do want the car back, and I want Jake to see what his father left for him. The car is legally yours, Howard confirmed. I can't in good conscience keep it knowing it was obtained fraudulently. But there is the matter of the money I paid to your son. I started to offer payment arrangements, but Howard held up his hand. Let me suggest an alternative, he said. I'll hold the car here temporarily safe and secure. When your son returns from Paris, bring him here. Let him see what his father left behind. Then we can discuss how to resolve the financial aspect in a way that honors Richard's legacy and hopefully heals your family. It was more generosity than I had any right to expect. Why would you do this for us? I asked. Howard smiled sadly. I lost my own son to drugs 20 years ago. Before he got clean, he sold many of my valuables to fund his habit, including family heirlooms. We reconciled before he passed away from an unrelated illness, and that reconciliation means more to me than any object ever could. Perhaps I can help another family find their way back to what matters. As I left the dealership that day, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The car had been found. Richard's final messages had been discovered. And maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward that could heal the wound Jake's betrayal had created. What I didn't yet know was how deeply Richard's hidden legacy would affect not just Jake, but all of us in the days to come. When Jake and Tiffany returned from Paris a week later, I invited them to dinner. I said nothing about finding the car or speaking with Howard. Instead, I listened as Tiffany showed me hundreds of photos from their trip, each one carefully staged to maximize the appearance of luxury and exclusivity. Jake remained mostly silent, his eyes avoiding mine whenever I looked his way. After dessert, as Tiffany excused herself to make a phone call, I finally addressed what had happened. Jake, I said gently, we need to talk about the Mustang. His shoulders tensed immediately. What's there to talk about? It's done. I know you sold it, I said, keeping my voice calm. And I know who bought it. Jake's head snapped up, surprise and alarm crossing his face. How did you find out? Howard Bennett called me. He realized something wasn't right about the sale. That wasn't his business, Jake said defensively. It was a legitimate transaction. No, it wasn't, I corrected him. You didn't own the car, Jake. You had no right to sell it. Howard could press charges for fraud. Fear flashed in Jake's eyes. Is he going to? No, I assured him. Neither am I, but I need you to understand something. That car wasn't just a possession to your father. It represented something much deeper. Jake scoffed, though the sound lacked conviction. It was just a car, Mom. Dad would have understood. He always said life was for the living. What do you think your father valued most in life? I asked, changing tactics. The question seemed to catch Jake off guard. I don't know. Success, I guess. Being able to provide for his family, having nice things. I shook my head sadly, realizing how little Jake had understood his father. Those weren't Richard's values at all. Your father valued craftsmanship, patience, integrity. He valued creating beauty from brokenness, and he valued passing those lessons on to you. Jake looked away, uncomfortable. Well, it doesn't matter now. The car is gone. Actually, it's not, I said. Howard is holding it at his gallery. He's agreed to work with us to resolve the situation, but first there's something you need to see. Tiffany returned just as I was explaining about Howard's discovery of the hidden compartment. Her interest piqued at the mention of secrets. What kind of hidden compartment? She asked, sitting beside Jake. Was there money in it? Jewelry? No, I said. Something far more valuable. The next day, I drove Jake and Tiffany to Classic Automotive Gallery. Howard met us at the entrance, greeting Jake with professional courtesy despite knowing the circumstances. He led us to the private showing room where the Mustang waited. Beautiful car, Howard commented as we approached the vehicle. Your father was a true artisan, Mr. Williams. Jake stood awkwardly beside the car, running his finger along the hood. He spent more time with this car than he did with me sometimes, he muttered. That's not true, I said, and I think you're about to understand why. Howard opened the driver's door and showed Jake the secret mechanism for the hidden compartment. Jake's eyes widened as the panel slid back, revealing the space his father had created. I handed Jake the wooden box first. He opened it slowly, his hands shaking slightly when he saw his father's wedding ring and the pocket watch. He read the note aloud, "For when Jake is ready to truly understand what matters." "What does that mean?" Tiffany asked, peering over his shoulder. Instead of answering, I handed Jake the journal. He flipped through it, his expression changing from confusion to wonder as he read snippets of his father's thoughts. "Dad wrote all this about me," he asked, his voice small. "And there's more," Howard said, producing a tablet where he had loaded the contents of the USB drive. "Your father left you messages. Quite a few of them." We sat in Howard's office watching as Richard spoke to his son from beyond. Jake's composure cracked a little more with each video. Tiffany unexpectedly was the first to cry when Richard talked about what makes a marriage strong, how it isn't built on destinations or possessions but on shared values and mutual respect. In the final video we watched that day, dated just a week before his death, Richard sat in the Mustang, looking tired but at peace. "Jake," he said, "I don't know when you'll find these messages. Maybe soon after I'm gone, maybe years later, but I hope that whenever you do, they help you remember what I tried to teach you through this car. Life isn't about acquiring things or impressing others. It's about building something meaningful, something that lasts. Sometimes that's a car, sometimes it's a business. Always, it's relationships." He paused, catching his breath before continuing. "This Mustang isn't your inheritance, son. Not really. The craftsmanship, the patience, the joy of creating something lasting, those are your inheritance. If you understand that, then whether you keep this car or sell it doesn't really matter. But if you don't understand that, then no possession, no amount of money will ever make you truly happy." When the video ended, Jake sat in silence, tears streaming down his face. Tiffany reached for his hand. Her own expression subdued, her phone untouched in her purse. Howard gave us privacy, stepping outside his office. When Jake could finally speak, his voice was rough with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said. "I had no idea. I thought Dad would want me to make Tiffany happy, to be successful. Your father wanted you to be fulfilled, not just successful," I said gently. "There's a difference." Jake nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "What happens now?" "With the car, with Howard." "That's something we need to figure out together," I said. "Howard paid you a lot of money for a car that wasn't yours to sell." To my surprise, Tiffany spoke up. "We still have most of it," she admitted. "The Paris trip didn't cost nearly what Jake got for the car. I wanted to seem successful to my followers. I thought if we could just have one amazing experience, post the right photos, we could turn things around somehow." Jake looked at her with new eyes, as if seeing past the carefully constructed image for the first time in years. "We've been living a lie," he said quietly. "Pretending everything was fine when my business was failing, spending money we didn't have on things we didn't need." "Your father went through business setbacks too," I told Jake. "But he always said the measure of a person isn't whether they fall, it's how they get back up." When Howard returned, Jake straightened his shoulders and faced him directly. "Mr. Bennett, I owe you an apology and repayment. I sold you a car that wasn't mine to sell." Howard considered him thoughtfully. "I appreciate your honesty, Jake, but perhaps there's a solution here that honors your father's legacy. I understand you have a background in software engineering." Jake nodded, confused by the change in topic. "My dealership needs a new inventory management system," Howard continued. "Our current software is outdated and inefficient. I've been looking for someone to develop a custom solution that understands the unique needs of classic car inventory. Would you be interested in working off your debt by developing this system for me?" The offer surprised all of us, Jake most of all. "You'd trust me to do that? After what I did?" "People deserve second chances," Howard said simply. "And from what I saw in those videos, your father was a man who believed in building people up, not tearing them down. I'd like to honor that approach." Jake accepted the offer immediately, gratitude evident in his face. As for the Mustang, we reached an agreement that it would remain at Howard's gallery, temporarily on display but marked as not for sale. Jake would work from an office at the gallery, surrounded by the craftsmanship his father had valued, developing a system that would help preserve and document other classic cars for future generations. In the months that followed, remarkable changes took place in our family. Jake immersed himself in his work at the gallery, his old passion for problem solving reignited in a new context. Howard became a mentor of sorts, sharing not just business wisdom, but life wisdom as well. Tiffany, to everyone's surprise, including her own, discovered a genuine interest in the stories behind classic cars. She began creating content about automotive history and restoration, finding a more authentic voice than her previous focus on luxury lifestyle. Her follower count initially dropped, but those who remained engaged more deeply with her honest portrayal of rebuilding a life based on substance rather than appearance. The most significant healing came 6 months after that first visit to Howard's gallery. Jake had completed the inventory system ahead of schedule, and Howard was so impressed he offered Jake a permanent position as the gallery's technology director. To celebrate, Jake suggested we take the Mustang for a family drive along the coastal route Richard had loved. As we cruised along the shoreline, windows down, the powerful engine rumbling beneath us, I glanced in the rearview mirror at Jake in the back seat. He was looking out at the ocean, one arm around Tiffany, a peace in his expression I hadn't seen since before Richard's illness. "Dad was right," Jake said, catching my eye in the mirror. "This car isn't valuable because of what it's worth at auction. It's valuable because of what it taught us, what it continues to teach us." "Your father would be so proud of you," I told him, meaning it with all my heart. "Not of what I did," Jake said, his voice tinged with lingering regret. "No," I agreed, "but of who you're becoming, of how you found your way back to what matters." That evening, as the sun set over the ocean, we parked at Richard's favorite overlook. Jake opened the hidden compartment and added something new, a letter he had written to his father thanking him for the legacy of values that had ultimately saved him from a life of empty materialism. I've learned that sometimes we have to lose something precious to truly understand its value. Jake had to lose his way to find the path his father had always hoped he would follow. I had to lose Richard to understand the depth of his wisdom and foresight. And sometimes, paradoxically, we have to let go of people we love to help them find their way back to themselves. Richard knew all along that the true inheritance he was leaving wasn't a car, no matter how valuable. It was the understanding that lasting fulfillment comes from creating rather than consuming, from authentic relationships rather than social approval, from living with integrity rather than chasing status. As we continue to rebuild our family bonds stronger now for having been broken and repaired, I often think about how Richard's 20 years of restoration work on that Mustang was really a metaphor for the work we all must do in our lives, finding beauty in brokenness, having the patience to rebuild what matters, understanding that the most valuable things in life aren't things at all. Have you ever had to lose something to understand its true value? Or discovered an unexpected message or gift from someone who's no longer with you? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and rediscovery. May you find the wisdom to recognize what truly matters in your own life